It's that time of the week on the Buckeye Breakdown podcast. It's time to go behind enemy lines. One of the biggest games of the season on Ohio State's schedule is upon us. The Buckeyes are heading to Happy Valley to play Penn State. Who better than to figure out what's going on with the Penn State Nittany Lions than to check in with our friend Mark Wogenrich from All Penn State on the FanNation Network. It's Behind Enemy Lines on Buckeye Breakdown coming up next. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Buckeye Breakdown podcast. Glad to have you along on Thursday of Ohio State's game week, getting ready for the Penn State Nittany Lions. I'm Brendan Gulick, and joined by Mark Wogenrich, our publisher at All Penn State on the FanNation Network on the Sports Illustrated Media Group. We're going to give you, as much as we can, a behind-the-scenes look at what's going on with the Nittany Lions program as Ohio State gets ready for one of its biggest games here in 2022. You can support the show by subscribing to our YouTube channel. We sure would appreciate that. And, of course, this is a live show, but we also post the audio after the fact wherever you like to find your favorite podcasts. And just so you know, the latest news and info is always over on BuckeyesNow.com. Mark, what's up?
Doing really well, Brendan. How are you? A day game, a noon game, Ohio State, Penn State, in Beaver Stadium. I'm not used to it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is. It's a little weird. It's good. It's fine, but it's going to be a little different for sure. I think Ohio State fans just sort of expected that this would be the whiteout game because it so often has been. And yet it's not an evening affair. I guess Fox didn't want to bump the World Series off the air, and so instead we have a 12 noon kick. But it should be a fun game. And frankly, personally, I'm glad to see that Penn State has played well this year, because I think it's more fun when this game, carries more meaning. So looking forward to Saturday for sure. Why don't we start maybe just kind of a 10,000-foot view? We are, I guess, just past the halfway point of the season. Where are the Nittany Lions compared to your expectations of where you thought they'd be at this point of the year?
So preseason, I actually had them in a game-by-game look. I had them at 5-2. Instead of 6-1. I thought they would run the table until Michigan, lose that game, and then have one of their kind of historical breakdowns against Minnesota last week, which they absolutely flipped that script otherwise, and then came out just bang in a 45-17 win over Minnesota. That really was their best, I think their most complete game of the year. And it did cleanse what happened against Michigan. It's strange because I think Penn State has recruited against Ohio State for so long, trying to be athletic, trying to get defensive backs and linebackers who can run with Ohio State's offense, that the matchup against Michigan, kind of ran parallel, and they didn't keep up with that. They did not keep up with the power they needed up front on both sides of the ball in that game. And that particular matchup, the way Michigan executed and the personnel they put on the field and the scheme that they ran was absolutely perfect against this 22 Penn State team. I think Penn State still matches up better with Ohio State, not athletically. I don't know that anybody will until Ohio State gets to the playoffs, should they get there. But Penn State just continues to try to recruit and to try to build a program that will be competitive with Ohio State. I mean, we're at past the 4-year anniversary of that 2018 game, after which James Franklin said, we have to go. We've gone from good to great. Now we've got to go from great to elite. Ohio State's elite. We have to get there. And they're still trying, quite frankly. They're still on that road.
I agree, but I have said a couple times this week, I'm not as concerned as an Ohio State guy. I'm not as concerned about Penn State this year as I am in future years, because I really, really like Drew Aller. And we can talk maybe a bit about Drew here in a few minutes. But, I guess maybe James Franklin should be the next place we take our discussion, since you mentioned his name. He's obviously an occasionally polarizing guy in the fan bases around the Big Ten. He's got a team that this year has probably had to show some toughness and grittiness Another season opening their Big Ten schedule on the road. That didn't sit well with him. Found a way to grind out a tough win against Northwestern. Won a game at Auburn. Big Ten teams don't typically go to SEC stadiums in the regular season and win or really play in general, but obviously that's a big feather in his cap and a great rebound win this past week. What is the thought and feeling around Coach Franklin at the moment in Penn State circles?
So I'll go back to what I was saying about 2018 and that 1-point loss. Game that Penn State was leading, I think it was 11 in the fourth quarter, 10 or 11 points in the fourth quarter. And that was the one that pushed his button. And then he pushed everybody in the fan base's button, again, with that speech saying, we've gone from good to great, and now we've got to get to elite. And I'm going to do everything in my power to get us there. And in order to get there, we're going to have to take these steps and details. And then very much got into the coach motivational thing. And quite frankly, the fan base is holding him to that. They haven't forgotten that. It's 4 years later, and they're still wondering, well, you said we're going to be elite. You said you're going to do everything you could to get us to elite. Why are we not elite? And then, so that leaves the fan base to set barometers, not based on the totality of a season, but based on individual games, Michigan and Ohio State primarily. So when you go to Michigan and lose by 24 and give up 418 yards rushing, which is the most the James Franklin team has allowed, it becomes a negative barometer. When you get to an Ohio State game, people against this particular Ohio State team, which I guess is, I just read a stat that they're the first Big Ten team since like 1903 with 6 consecutive 45-point games. And they're just either beating teams by 40 and, averaging 54 over their last 6. When they see a team like that and say, that is the measure of elite that we're aspiring to, what have you done to get us there? And then in conjunction with that, you just signed a 10-year contract worth essentially a guaranteed $75 million up to $85 million. What are we getting? What is our value add for that? What are we getting for that $75 million? Coming off of 2 seasons where they went, just statistically, they went 11-11 over the past 2 years. You can argue context and semantics about 2020 and injuries last year, but those are still the numbers. So there is very much a prove me sense regarding James Franklin and this fan base. And it comes to, maybe this is a segue, and it kind of came to a head last week, at Minnesota that, fans have booed before, but I don't know that I've ever heard fans boo a quarterback and a coach during the introductions of a whiteout game. That was new for me, and that really took me back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know I've ever seen that. And obviously you've been covering the team longer, than a lot of other people on the beat. I don't know that I've seen that any team anywhere where your coach and quarterback are booed like that.
In the introductions, not during the game, not after. They were booed during the game too, 3-and-outs interception. But this is during 3-game introductions of a whiteout. I really can't stress that enough.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. I like Sean Clifford. I like him. He's a good kid. He is really tough. He's the kind of quarterback that is team first. I don't care if, my knuckles are bloody from getting hit. I'll do whatever I got to do to figure out a way to get the job done. And if I were playing on a team, I would want to rally behind a quarterback that has that mentality. I have a lot of respect for Sean in that regard. I don't think anybody's going to confuse his ability, his overall talent level with some of the elite quarterbacks in the country, but what he might lack in talent, he certainly makes up in leadership. As I look at the situation, I think they've got a young quarterback who, I think Drew is a star in the making. I saw him play several times in high school because he literally went to school 20 minutes down the road from where I live. He checks every physical box. Drew is also a really mature young kid, and I think it's pretty obvious he's the future of the program. How many people are you kind of hearing or do you get the sense that the fan base is kind of saying, hey, I know we're 6-1, but maybe we kind of know what the ceiling could be with Sean if we gave the opportunity for Drew to go at it this year, is it worth it? Do you hear any of those kinds of conversations?
Constantly. I mean, again, at Beaver Stadium, when Drew Aller has entered games, there are very noticeable, tangible, loud cheers. The fan base knows who he is. It's partly because they've not had a quarterback recruit really like that in quite a long time. Christian Hackenberg came in as a very highly ranked quarterback recruit with Bill O'Brien, and he started as a freshman in 2013. And then it had to be, and then he transitioned to an offense, and things just kind of unraveled with him protection wise, all sorts of things happen. But they haven't had these kinds of quarterbacks necessarily. Even Kerry Collins, I don't think, was that highly recruited. They've had 4- and 5-star guys over the course of like the 2000s and 2010s, but they never panned out. Drew is a guy who they're eager to see, incredibly eager to see whether he pans out. One of the things that I've said repeatedly that James Franklin has to do to get to that elite status is to put a quarterback in the NFL. Trace McSorley was just an unbelievably great college quarterback at Penn State. I mean, what he did in 16 and also even in 17, and then as he got injured in 18, but his career was phenomenal. But Trace wasn't going to necessarily be a full-time NFL starting quarterback. And I'm hearing people telling me that that's what Drew Aller is. I mean, he's going through 3 years in college, is going to be an NFL quarterback. They can see it now from him. So absolutely, there's fans out there who want the future to be now without really understanding that it's difficult for coaches. And I think it should be difficult for any program to give up the idea on a 10-win season, even in the 14 playoff world where a 10-win season might not necessarily get you into a playoff, but to give up on that idea in order to play for a future that might or may not come this year. You might struggle with Drew Aller this year if you stretch him into full-time games. They might not have beaten Minnesota. I really don't know the situations of how stuff might have worked out, but they might have struggled because he has shown tendencies to be a freshman. He's been great in some of the elements he's been in, but he has shown freshman tendencies. So if you want to ride with that and potentially give up the concept of a 10-win season, which I think you have a better chance of doing with Sean Clifford, that's a tough thing. That's a tough ask for a football coach to make who then has to recruit rosters. Kids aren't necessarily going to say that, well, I really see what you're trying to do there in the system and the future. You went 8-4. I don't know if I want to play for an 8-4 team. That's a really tough balance for a coach to make. So I get where Penn State is coming from in this situation, but at the same time, fans do. I think there's just a level of Sean Clifford fatigue at Beaver Stadium.
That's why James Franklin's paid a whole lot of money to figure it out, and he's got to make the right decision. That's for sure. This team is more than just about their quarterback, and perhaps nobody has taken headlines this year quite like Singleton has. You get a freshman running back that can really, really play in the Big Ten, and you're going to open some eyes. And I think the ability to run the ball when you have a quarterback that might have some limitations, that balance can trigger some offensive success in this league for sure. I don't see Penn State's offense as super explosive. I think they've had some good moments this year, but they're a top 50 offense statistically in the country, and they've been fine. I don't think the offense is the reason that they are, a 6-1 team necessarily, though. How would you sort of categorize both Singleton's freshman year and the offensive performance in general?
The offense in general has been better than last year because of the running game has been better with not just Nicholas Singleton, but the other freshman, Katron Allen. They have two really, really good freshman running backs who, as long as they can keep them here, together and wanting to play together, they're going to be great. I mean, they've lost to the transfer portal 2 running backs already, one before the season and one after 4 games because they knew they weren't going to play. So they're actually down, and there was another running back who's been injured. They're the only 2, the freshmen are the only 2 scholarship running backs who were available essentially for the last 2 weeks. So they got into this position where they had this embarrassment of riches of freshmen and experience, and now they have just freshmen. They've both been very good. Katron Allen is that running back who can get you 4 to 5 to 6 yards consistently. Nick Singleton is the guy who can break one, even though he couldn't really do it against Michigan. He has that tendency to want to juke outside and make those cuts. I don't know that he's going to be able to do that against Ohio State either. Otherwise, as you said, Penn State's big play offense, outside of reestablishing itself last week against Minnesota with the tight ends and then with Parker Washington, who I think is their number 1 receiver, has been good. They've lost some of that big play ability that they've relied on in the past. Getting it back, I think, is important for them. The offense I think, has been okay to find. It's been inconsistent. It had some, really didn't play well against Northwestern. You can call it rain being an issue. The second half against Central Michigan, and then it was just non-existent against Michigan. This is an offense I think that in order to have a chance, it's got to put up at least 30 points in this game. I don't know where that's going to come from. And I don't know how you're going to keep Ohio State under 30. That's what I'm saying. 30 is kind of a low bar for that offense to set, and I have a hard time seeing that happen.
I know I contributed a bit on your site earlier this week, and we were kind of debating the same thing as like, what could the formula be for a Penn State upset? And look, it's college football, so let's acknowledge that crazy things happen, and we've seen it plenty of times already around the country this year. But we haven't seen anything yet from Ohio State that leads you to believe they're going to score fewer than 35 points for sure. And 40, I mean, right now they're averaging almost 50 a game, including a 21-point output in the season opener. So you have to try to win a track meet. You've got to try to slow the game down and extend drives. And Ohio State's defense has been pretty good at snuffing that out. So if Penn State, let's say they have a great day offensively and things click and they can, for the most part, punch it at their weight class and score, back and forth with Ohio State. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm curious why you think their pass defense has performed as well as it has this year. Because right now I think they're 5th in the country in pass efficiency defense. They've got, I think, 7 interceptions off the top of my head, and they've only given up 6 passing touchdowns. So it's a group that hasn't necessarily been torched through the air. And obviously that's a strength for Ohio State with this group of receivers and with C.J. Stroud.
They've been really good because the secondary is the best part. That is the best position group on the roster. Penn State's never had a defensive back drafted in the first round. That's going to be Joey Porter Jr. most likely next year. I think if there's a matchup that I'm really looking forward to seeing, and I really hope we get it on, more than a couple snaps, it's Joey Porter Jr. versus Marvin Harrison Jr. That's just even with the backstory of the two of them, their fathers, things like that. But these are 2 of the elite players in college football. So to see them match up, just man-to-man coverage, a receiver trying to beat a defensive back, that will be great. I think that's great theater, and it's a really great subplot. But Penn State's secondary and the way Manny Diaz, their new defensive coordinator, uses them has been really good in the sense that it's not just the interceptions, but they lead the nation in pass breakups at, I think it's 56 right now. And it started because Purdue tried to throw a billion times on them and they just knocked, the ball out of the sky. And then they got into, the non-con season and teams were trying to play catch up. So they faced a lot of passing, but their defensive backs between Joey Porter Jr., safety Jair Brown, Kalen King, another corner really to watch, and some other younger players in that secondary. They're aggressive. They get on the ball. They're around the ball a lot. They get away with a little bit of grabbing and handhold, and jersey grabbing and maybe a little bit of passive PI here and there. I'd be curious to see how that is going to be called. But they're not afraid of man coverage, and they're not afraid of, essentially of losing a single, a man-to-man battle. They're eager, they're able to do that. They'll play, they call it their prowler package. They'll put 7 defensive backs on the field. They'll cheat a safety up, and he'll become, he'll blitz from that position, or he'll try to fill a run gap, things like that, because they're trying to maybe mask some deficiencies at linebacker. Ohio State with weapons of running back, wide receiver, and tight end can level that out against Penn State, against that Penn State defense. They don't have to necessarily attack the secondary and attack the corners and try to get man-to-man, try to get single coverage with receiver and receiver. They can go to the tight end. Penn State just can't cover like everybody else. They can't cover everybody, even with a really talented secondary.
Well, and I think, part of what makes a really good secondary can frankly be what kind of pressure you generate on a quarterback. Yeah. If you get good linebackers that are constantly harassing quarterbacks, so if you're blitzing more than they can block, it certainly helps if you have great play in the trenches. And frankly, I think if you watch the tape really closely last week, CJ Stroud's 20 for 30 for 286, 4 touchdowns and an interception might be a bit misleading, because when watching the game, there were a lot of moments in the first half in particular against Iowa that he was pretty frustrated. Iowa did a really good job in the box, and they absolutely have been the number one team pressuring CJ Stroud this year. Even Notre Dame's defense, I don't think, really harassed Stroud the way that Iowa did last week. And obviously that's on tape, right? I'm sure Penn State knows, hey, we got to get to the quarterback. That's not rocket science. I think it's fair to point out the Buckeyes this year have had a really big emphasis on their toughness and their desire to try to run the ball between the tackles. It's been good most games. Last week, that was a little bit of a challenge. I think Iowa's defense gets a lot of credit for that. But I would anticipate that Ohio State is going to want to come out and try to establish the run to then maybe give themselves that added edge, knowing that they've got the kind of talent on the outside. If you give a guy, it's an offensive game. If you give a guy long enough and he's a good quarterback and you got wide receivers that can run good routes, you're going to find somebody open eventually. So I bring that all back to say, and the interior of the defense, either at line or at linebacker, do you think that Penn State can generate enough pressure on CJ Stroud to try to speed his clock up and force him into mistakes?
They're going to try to do that. I don't know that they can, especially if they don't have defensive end Chop Robinson, who didn't play last week. It looks like he'll probably play. He's their best guy at getting pressure on that defensive line. They'll try to blitz him. They'll bring their linebackers. They'll bring some of their faster linebackers, and they'll try to bring their safeties. They'll safety blitz them. They'll corner blitz them. I think they're going to go for broke on that sense. That they're going to put this game really on the track of saying, let's try to get as much pressure on CJ Stroud because nobody's really done it. If we're able to do it, maybe we can force the issues that other teams haven't. But over the past couple of weeks, Michigan ran a system, and Penn State could not handle it. They weren't physical enough, and they couldn't get around the blocks. I mean, Michigan's offensive line was just so skilled and ran such a good system against that defense that they had free gaps for their running backs. Last week, Minnesota dragged Ibrahim to 100 yards. It was like 30 carries for 100 yards. They didn't have a quarterback who could really kind of make Penn State pay for playing the run, and they're using their backup quarterback. Sure. So I just, with a full and healthy Ohio State offense, Penn State's going to pick one. And I think the one they're going to pick, probably going to try to be the run stop element, the pass rush element, and leave their corners, who they're going to trust, playing against the receiving crew, and we'll see where that gets them. They've been good, and they've been terrific at that, but they haven't seen this group.
Sure. Mark Wogenrich, our guest and the publisher from All Penn State and our Sports Illustrated media group, FanNation Network. Let's wrap with maybe just a thought on the Big Ten. This has obviously been a little bit of a weird year in that the West feels like, believe it or not, there's still a scenario that Northwestern could go to the Big Ten championship game, as wild and unlikely as that sounds, given the way they've played this year. The West is wide open. It kind of feels like Ohio State and Michigan have separated themselves from the rest of the league, but that maybe that next tier down includes a number of pretty good teams. And I would include Penn State in that next tier. They're going to win a lot of games. And like you said, I think there's a pretty darn good chance you could finish the year with double-digit victories. How has, with perhaps Ohio State and Michigan pulled out of the equation here for a moment because the expectations for them were high, how do you think the rest of the Big Ten is shaping out as maybe you predicted or thought it could at the beginning of the year?
Illinois is the surprise to me. Didn't see that one coming, even though I did see them and their system last year. I look at it, if you go back to 2020 when they played that 9th week game with like just the matchup of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that sort of thing. I'm really curious, would it be, if you're going to go in order and say Ohio State, Michigan is your de facto title game, is it then Penn State versus Illinois in that like third place game kind of thing? I think that would actually be, we're not going to see that game this year because they don't play. That'd be a really fascinating game again, because Illinois just absolutely roadblocked Penn State last year in that, unprecedented 9 overtime thing. And I'm wondering if Brett Bielema has actually got a quarterback this year and, a better offense for his run game. Could they do it again? Could they beat Penn State with that system that's even better this year on a defense that's better? That Illinois rise to me is really surprising. And it makes me go back to wondering where Penn State fits in the hierarchy, because they've spent all this time and energy chasing Ohio State, but does that allow other programs that are running different systems and that are just really focusing on that particular system, on personnel to fit that system, on scheme and coaches to fit that system, and on an entire infrastructure to fit that system, like Michigan and Illinois seem to be doing? Is that going to end around Penn State as they're chasing athletes to compete with Ohio State? That's a fascinating, I think, couple of years to watch.
Totally agree.
Where that heads.
Yeah, no, and frankly, the fact that, to me, Penn State is one of the schools that could certainly benefit from the expanded college football playoff.
No question.
Whenever it gets here. Almost every single year, they're probably ranked right around where that cut line could be by the end of the year. And I'm of the opinion that the expanded playoff is going to help a lot of schools in recruiting, because it's opening access to play for a national championship to a wider group of players. This is a subject for another podcast, but the idea that name, image, and likeness, especially for the best teams in the country with a limited playoff, there's a reason why the top kids in the country are going to Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State, and a decent number of them Clemson, because those are the schools that get there every year. They've got the program to support it. They've got the NIL money to support those kids, or NIL opportunities, maybe the better way to say it, to support those kids. And, in some ways in college football, the true blue bloods are not going to fall off. But with an expanded playoff, I think there's a lot of programs like Penn State that could certainly benefit from that extra opportunity to compete in the playoff. So we'll see how that goes as the years go on. And I'm going to enjoy as much as I can as an Ohio State guy watching this game, because I'm telling you, man, when Drew Aller takes that team next year, I think Penn State's got to have a chance to really, really take people by surprise. He's the real deal. And I think Ohio State is always going to be in good hands. They've got good players, But Penn State's program next year with Singleton having another year under his belt, I know you'll lose a little bit in the secondary, but it's a good program. And I think there are some Ohio State fans that are looking at Penn State with a keen eye and a respect, because they know that this has been the hardest game on Ohio State's schedule for basically a decade. I mean, nobody else in the league has given the Buckeyes hell the way Penn State has. I know Ohio State has predominantly won those games, but they have been ultra competitive, and obviously a couple times have been really close to having the bottom fall out.
Yeah, I wrote about that earlier this week. Since James Franklin took over in 2014, Penn State is 1-7, no doubt. But if you look at the Big Ten East teams, Ohio State's average margin of victory against Penn State in those games is 10. I think the next closest then is Michigan at 20. So they're beating everybody else in the Big Ten East by at least double what they've beaten Penn State. Penn State's found a way. That's why I say this matchup for them is not the worst thing in the world, because they've recruited toward it, and they just seem to make a game out of this. The only time they haven't is really 2015. And so there's just an element to that. And that's why I think it wouldn't surprise me if this in the fourth quarter is another one-possession game and something flips for Ohio State and they get a late touchdown, or they get a turnover. They get something that breaks their way, or they make a break that goes their way with a big play, their passing game, whatever. But I can see one possession in the fourth quarter. Still maybe a 2-touchdown win.
Yeah,
but
we'll find out. I mean, it should be a lot of fun. I think the Vegas spread last time I saw it was still hovering just around, or maybe just north of 2 touchdowns, and an over/under of 61 was the last I saw. So we'll see if it ends up being a game that kind of reflects those numbers. In the meantime, for all of our Ohio State fans, if you're interested in learning more about Penn State or reading up on the Nittany Lions as you get ready for the week, head over to All Penn State. It's si.com/college/Penn State. Mark and his team have you covered over there. Mark, thanks for spending some time with us, man. Appreciate the conversation and the perspective, and look forward to seeing you very early on Saturday.
Please get there early, Brendan. Appreciate the time. Thanks for having me.
For all the latest on Ohio State, head to BuckeyesNow.com. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We certainly would appreciate it if you'd support the channel that way. And if you're listening after the fact, know that you can watch these or listen to these live over on our channel as well. For Mark Wogenrich, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you again soon as Ohio State and Penn State get ready for a big game, Week 8 of the Big Ten season coming up here in Happy Valley.